Hello.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Clean and Raw Food Certification Forum. Today, we'll be spotlighting another amazing company called FoodNerd. They make snacks for babies that are really healthy. We should be starting in another few minutes as a lot of people are still joining. Hi, Margaret. Can you hear me?
Were you speaking to me? This is Omar.
Hi, Omar. I just saw a message from Margaret saying that she
Oh, I'm
can't
sorry.
hear.
I'm sorry. I thought you were speaking to me.
No. How are you doing, Omar?
All right. How are you?
Good. Again, good morning, everyone. This is Prabhakar with the Clean and Raw Food Certification. We should be starting shortly as we still have people joining us.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dr.SHIVA.
Hi, Prabhakar. Are we waiting a little more, or do you want to start?
Yeah, I think we can start. I'll let people in as they come in now.
Okay. So welcome, everyone. This is our Tuesday raw, clean forum that we do, and we decided to do these to really educate people as a part of one of our solution frameworks in Truth, Freedom, Health, the nature of where food comes from and how you actually determine what is clean food. Some of you may know the clean food movement is one of the biggest phenomenon that's taking place in the world. And I wanted to share with you, Prabhakar, if you can just let me share the screen, is that all right?
Yeah.
So to just let you know that how important this area is, Prabhakar, do you have that? I think I have it. Do you have that McKinsey report I sent you, Prabhakar? Do you have that with you?
I think let me see if I can.
I think I sent it to you, right? So while Prabhakar's bringing that up, so I just typed in, let me go, Prabhakar, if I can share my screen. So if you go to, some of you may know there's Google, right? So if you go to Google and you type in clean certification, our thing comes up number one, and we haven't even done anything to attempt to even do any type of SEO. Companies spend millions and millions of dollars trying to get their stuff to show first up on Google. So the clean food movement has grown on its own. It's an organic bottoms-up movement. But most importantly, we've created this entire standard for it. And the standard, you all can find it here on the website. Everything's transparent. This is a bottoms-up movement and a standard. So this is a serious technical document that we've developed over the last now 12 years of a lot of hard work. And the document continues to change, but this really is like the manual that defines the clean food standard. We're going to go through that today, and then we're going to share with you a case study of one of a small business who recently got certified. But the main thing is you can see that the standard is not run by the government. It's run by us, we the people. This is quite extraordinary. And we have defined what clean food means, and all of you guys are part of that. But the main thing I wanted to emphasize here is that our hard work has resulted in, if you go to type in clean certification, we're the ones that show up number one out there. And so the opportunity is for all of you to, as a part of this talk, to learn what is clean certification, why it matters, and why our movement, Truth, Freedom, Health, among our different solution sets, we're on the tip of this thing because people talk about, removing this from food, taking this out, but no one's actually created a formal standard to support this, but not in any one specific way of just taking organic or just taking non-GMO, because food is obviously a complex system. There's not one thing that works. I see Udo Erasmus is here. Udo, I use your oil. How are you? Udo produces one of the best oils in the world. And Udo himself is a scientist, but he's taken a similar approach to developing oils, which and he wrote, I think, one of the book on it, which I have in my library on, but I've been, when you take a scientific approach, you start appreciating what food is at a molecular systems level. That there are many, many seemingly contradictory things going on, but there's not one size fits all. So when we built the clean certification model, it was done to really support this, complex nature of food. So let me give you a little bit of history. Prabhakar, can you bring up the slide set of what we're going to discuss today? Let's go right into it. Yeah. So we're going to talk about FoodNerd, and this is a case study. The key thing here is that there are many certifications that are out there, and I just want to talk about this. The government can impose a certification, let's say clean, in any field of endeavor, be it electrical engineering, be it computer science, be it mechanical engineering. Typically, there are standards committees which are defining different types of standards for different products, like for your camera, or if you look at your microphone, if you look at your all different things, you'll notice sometimes there are these little standards. These standards committees are typically formed by stakeholders and consumers in the field. So when we say this is a bottoms-up movement, I'll talk more about it, that this standard actually evolved. It's not something I wanted to do. I was called in to help do it when Whole Foods many, many years ago had a problem with trying to attempt to define safety in what's called the raw food movement. Next. So we'll talk a little bit about where the clean food movement is housed, the International Center for Integrative Systems, which is a center that's dedicated to really taking systems approaches. And we'll go into what is clean and raw food. Then we'll talk about this one company, FoodNerd. We'll talk about what is the investment. And then we'll talk about how you can support what we do. Next. So who can benefit from this forum? Pretty much anyone. You know, people and animals who eat food. Obviously, there's no animals who can attend, but nearly everyone. Food and dietary supplement manufacturers, farmers, restaurateurs, and ingredient suppliers. Next. So these are so for example, here is a snack company, a very small business. Next. Beverage companies, Buchi kombucha, honey producers. We may have mentioned honey is very, very hard to really denote the sourcing of it. In fact, USDA organic doesn't really get it perfectly right. And so we've had to build something parallel, which actually measures the chemical composition, because honey, bees have to be, according to USDA, 3 miles away from the source of the honey. Next. Dietary supplement companies, sugars. Next. Nut butters. Next. And there's a lot more. Next. So the certification is housed in the center that I started out of MIT to really train the public on how to think from a systems perspective. Next. And the way we've organized the center, it's all volunteer run, volunteer scientists, volunteers. We have a board. We do 3 major initiatives at the center. One is we run a program on innovation systems, and we support 13 to 18-year-olds who want to innovate. There's a program for that. We do research on the systems biology of GMOs. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then clean and raw. Those of you who have children, you may want to go check out Innovation Corps. There's grants left for 2024, 2025. We select 8 kids who want to really learn how to innovate and are actually doing innovative things. A lot of young people do some very, very cool things, and this is a way to give them recognition and support. Next. The systems biology group next evolved out of work when I finished up MIT out of the Department of Biological Engineering. MIT was pushing genetically engineered foods, and they put out a report saying buy fresh, buy GMOs. And I really hadn't studied GMOs. So we ended up doing a series of research papers where we simply looked at what are the molecular pathways in plants, C1 metabolism, what happens when plants undergo oxidative stress, what happens when plants undergo genetic modification. And then, and particularly we looked at soy. Next. So we ended up understanding, next, there's a whole presentation I've done on this, but we ended up wanting to understand what is the difference. So when we put all these molecular mechanisms together and we did physical chemistry analysis on this, we found out next that in our work, which is the bottom line using computational chemistry, that a genetically engineered soy plant would have a significant lever, about 249%. That's what we predicted. RRS means Roundup Ready soy, would have significantly less glutathione, and the value there, GSH over GSSG, is actually a measure of glutathione levels. Now, when we published that, and that was actually the 5th series of papers, we were attacked by the European community, Monsanto people saying, oh, this research is just computational, you can't prove this. But everything we had put together was based on individual in vivo or in vitro experiments. So we were very fortunate. A group in Leeds in London had actually grown organic soy plants, which is column 2, and Roundup Ready soy plants, and they too found the same results. But we know why it's causing it because we had actually uncovered the molecular mechanisms. And after we put that out, we didn't really hear any noise from them all, and it sort of just disappeared. But it's an important series of papers that we did. Next. So that's, again, we take a systems approach. And then we were called to help Whole Foods in, was it 2000 and, what year was that, Prabhakar? 2012, right? Had a interesting problem. They had, some of you may know, if you bring back video, Prabhakar, some of you may know, there was an issue taking place in the field of let me see if I can bring my camera on here. I'm gonna bring my camera. My lighting isn't that great, but I'll bring it on anyway. So some of you may know in 2000 and well, starting in the early 90s, there was a big movement towards what's called clean and raw food. And in that clean and raw movement, people were proposing what is raw food, R.A.W. By 2010, that movement had essentially grown to about a $300 million market. The problem was no one had really defined what R.A.W. meant. And I think the year before, in 2011 or 12, Whole Foods had to remove a bunch of kombucha products off their shelves. And the reason that happened was one of them had a very high bacterial load. So there were 16 different kombucha lines, and when one had an issue, it affected that entire category. Okay. So John Burns was the head of safety. I got contacted through various people. I just finished up my PhD work at MIT, and I had been on various standards committees. And the goal was, could we define a standard for raw, R.A.W.? The sloganeering out there was that that anything heated over 108 is dead. That was sort of the religion in some ways. So if we go to the next slide, so what we did was we held a series of meetings because we were really asked to facilitate this process over a period of many years, actually over a period of a year. And I was called because the MIT Department of Food and Nutrition Science had changed its name to Biological Engineering. And I was always interested in medicine health, but I applied my stuff in other areas of standards next. And so what we did was we brought in various stakeholders. This is now 2013 in San Diego. Next. And we asked these people, what is the definition of raw? And everyone, like the blind men touching the elephant, had very, very different views. Some people said it had to be vegan. Other people said you couldn't heat anything over 108. Other people had notions that it had to be plant-based. Other people said you couldn't include seed oils. Other people said it had to be non-GMO. Anyway, everyone had their view. There was actually no consensus. And when you build a standard, the goal is you actually have to get people involved, and you have to come to a consensus, and you have to have everyone participate. So we held, I think, 10, 12 different public hearings. And ultimately, next slide, we came to the conclusion that there were 3 characteristics that everyone agreed when you peeled away the hood of what raw meant. From the retailer standpoint, like Whole Foods and others, they wanted safety. Safety meaning they wanted to make sure that what you put out there wouldn't hurt people, right? And that was one key characteristic. How was the food being produced as part of safety? Is it being produced in places that it's actually, there's no, rat droppings, for example? Because we'd actually heard through one of the manufacturers who came to our events that, he's saying, no one knows this, but he goes, I produce stuff. There's all sorts of animals running around, but he goes, this industry is very nascent. So you had a lot of people who were making these raw foods, doing out of their homes, small business people. Not that they were bad people, but there was no standards, right? So one was safety. The next one that emerged was minimally processed versus what you see in ultra processed foods. And then the other one was, when you're taking these nutrients, what's the bioavailability? So everyone, after this took us about 9 months, almost a year, came to the agreement that these were sort of standards for the notion of raw. Okay. Now we had to put some, so if this is a foundation, we have to put some meat on the bones here. Next. So again, through a next series of meetings, we said, okay, let's define raw as real, alive, and whole. And what does that mean? Okay. So the key thing I think retailers, like many of the retailers, wanted was to make sure the food was safe. So by the way, you have to get 80 out of 100 in this emerging standard to get certified raw. Safety ended up becoming, thank you. Safety ended up becoming the attributes or the processes that people had to have in their physical plants or homes or kitchens that conform to checkpoint analysis. Things like HACCP. Prabhakar, do you want to just give people an idea, just at a very high level, what is HACCP? H-A-C-C-P? H-A-A-C-P?
So when you're manufacturing something, there's usually there's this process flow that you design. That means it could involve like getting the raw materials, cleaning them, grinding them or mixing them with some other stuff, and then maybe heating them to a certain degree, and packaging them, and then shipping them off. So at each of these end of each of these processes, you have to make sure that uh, a safe environment is maintained. There's no contamination from other microbial contamination or any heavy metal contamination. So the HACCP protocol is the one that actually determines how exactly you can maintain the safety of the manufacturing unit. So that is a key part of the real criteria. So by employing practices such as HACCP or GMP certification, which is also another way of making sure that the process is safe, we guarantee, the manufacturer guarantees that the product that they're producing is safe for consumption. And when we were designing this standard, this was something that everybody said has to be included as a mandatory criteria. That's why you see a 0 or 25 score for the safety aspect of it.
Yeah, and I think the critical thing here was there were many small manufacturers, people who had never, very young entrepreneurs were making this in their homes, and some of them could be potential to liability. So this gave them a framework to know that they could, or the world could know that how they were producing stuff was safe. And there were other criteria. You can read through the standard on that. The second piece was unanimously, again, we were essentially the facilitators of this, wanted non-genetically engineered products. So if you could not validate the control points, or you were non-GMO, or you were GMO, you wouldn't get 50 points, which means you're out, because if you didn't get any one of those, you're already below 80, because if you got all the others, you'd be 75. So these became two critical path criteria for the R score. Okay, next. Now it came to understanding, next, enzymatically bioactive. And this is an area that people have basically been saying, if you heat it, it was a 1 or a 0. If you go over 108 degrees, the product is dead. And this has been in sort of the, for years, I was a raw foodist for years. And it was sort of a part of the raw food understanding, what's called the natural hygiene movement, that if you heat anything over 108, it's dead. The reality is that really true? So if you, from a physical chemistry standpoint, if you have two molecules interacting, the conformation of those molecules determine if those molecules will interact and lead to a reaction. So what we did was we wanted to give a little bit more nuance and depth here. Next, so what we did was what it emerged out of, again, the standard was, so if you look at a product like this, which has a number of ingredients, and you look at some of these products, you'll notice, for example, the chickpea miso. Miso, as you know, in some ways is quote unquote raw. And this product, Brad's kale chips, these ingredients are combined and then they're dehydrated. The question for them as a manufacturer was at what temperature is a product, quote unquote, not raw? So what we did was for each of these ingredients, per the standard, we agreed that we would take, again, we can define the standard as we want, 3 to 4, next slide, 3 to 4 of the top molecules in that ingredient by molecular weight, and then we would calculate their denaturing temperatures, next, and we would aggregate them together to create one of these transition curves. And we do this for each product. But it gives a framework to say, as you heat it, in aggregate, what you look at, what we call the bioavailability. And you notice up until the first about 120 degrees, the product is pretty stable. And then it obviously goes under conformational changes, but it's still not dead. It's not like after 120, it just precipitously falls to 0. And then, so these people were heating their products, I think at 120, and then they changed their dehydrators to go a little bit hotter so they could get better throughput. They changed it to 140. So they're, according to this calculation, they're at 80%. And if you multiply 80% for 20 points, they would get 16 points, sort of 16 brownie points associated with this. Next. And then finally, and by the way, just to give you an idea, CytoSolve is a technology that came out of my PhD work. For those of you who've been to one of our other forums, CytoSolve allows us to do large-scale understanding of molecular pathways using physical chemistry. Typically today, pharmaceutical companies just take one ingredient and then they have to do in vitro, in vivo, and then do clinical trials. With CytoSolve, we're able to take combinations of ingredients and do large-scale molecular mechanisms, mechanistic understanding to see how those work. So CytoSolve, for example, we've been able to identify molecules in this, distill those molecules, meaning understand where those molecules interact mechanistically, and then discover combinations. So one of the things that we discovered, and we just wrote a paper on this, was these are two very interesting ingredients. One comes from chamomile, and the other comes from bitter orange, which is asparagine. And we just published a paper on this. We have another paper coming out in Nature talking more about different combinations in ALS, et cetera. But these combinations of ingredients affect multiple molecular pathways of pain and inflammation. We did this as a project. It ended up being actually produced. And you can go look at it. It's called MV25. But the point is that this technology is what we can use for bioavailability analysis. Next. And so this is just an aside, and if you guys want to know more, we'll talk about it. But this is something we did not intend on doing, but this analytical capability allows us to do this analysis. And then, by the way, that's donated to the center. Organic, we kept it as a range in the scoring because there were certain products which are wild crafted that you can't get the US organic USDA seal, but there are products which people do get the USDA seal, but they still have chemical constituents in there. So we actually do chemical analysis of those. And then nutrient density is a different score that we calculate using the Andy score. So it's a hybrid model. Next, so what came out of this was a multi-systems approach to understand what is clean/raw. You have to get 80 or more. So next, and this became a standard that we presented at a number of, Prabhakar, can you just bring up the standards document? Yes. So this became the standard document that we presented again. And by the way, people could comment on it, give their feedback. It's called a public hearing. We just held our, what was it, our 15th one, Prabhakar, or 14th one?
15.
15th one. So we do these. We take people's feedback. People may want new products certified. For example, people want eggs certified. So we build that framework. We have to get it to standards committee. People give feedback. So it's a process. And then a consensus develops. So go back. So when we presented the standard at one of the big expos, everyone liked it, but a number of people said, hey, wait a minute. You are, by the way, the raw standard, if anything is heated over 212, it's not considered, you can't fulfill the raw standard. There are nuts and seeds. Prabhakar, I think it's by the US laws, right? That any nuts or seeds that come into the United States have to be flash pasteurized. But what's fascinating is, even though they're flash pasteurized, you can still take them and you can sprout them and they still have capabilities to grow. They're still quote unquote raw. So in the standard is a carve out for nuts as long as they're flash pasteurized. But beyond that, you can't go over 212. There are products out there which are produced over 212, but they still have other attributes that still make them safe and organic and non-GMO. They have a certain bioavailability and they're nutritious. So we built a sister standard called C.L.E.A.N to give support to those companies which are heading in this direction. So that became the C.L.E.A.N sister standard. Next. So what's evolved now is at the center. Next. That's what this that's what the center does. We have volunteer scientists. Part of when we created the standard was we had to make this affordable because it wasn't really a money-making venture by any means, to companies which were doing 10,000 in revenue all the way to companies who were doing 100 million in revenue. And when we show you the pricing, it came again bottoms up. So large companies in many ways are supporting the small companies. The small companies find it affordable. So next. So FoodNerd is a company that came to us. Next. And they make healthy snacks for babies. And they wanted to get clean and raw certified. And they make it from wholesome meals from scratch. Their products are plant-based. They do quite a bit of research. So they brand it as science-backed. They go for nutritional density. And they want to support both gut and brain health. And they've been certified for about a year now, since 2023. Next. So, Prabhakar, can you bring up some of their products? If you can just show that to people. Maybe you have it here.
Yeah, it's in the later slides, but I can.
Yeah. So, by the way, this company is not like a Procter and Gamble or anything. They're relatively a small company. As Prabhakar scrolls through this, so you can just scroll down, right? So they do these FoodNerd Mega Puffs, okay? And if you notice, go up a little bit, Prabhakar, they do with sprouted broccoli seeds, which means there's quite a bit of work that shows an effect in traditional cultures. Nuts and seeds and all these things used to be typically soaked, sprouted, and then you threw out the water. And that was a way that you ensured that you didn't have a lot of this phytic acid, which can get in the way of mineral absorption. So scroll down, Prabhakar. So these are their products. Again, you notice it's for children or babies in this case, young kids. It's developed using, for example, this is sprouted seeds and beets and dates and cinnamon. Very simple, pretty straightforward, low, if anything, minimally processed ingredients. Okay. So thanks, Prabhakar. But they have a range of products. So the product development that they do is with the focus on promoting well-being. Next. And it's ensuring customers can have confidence in the quality and safety. That's their core values. So on the score of safety and non-GMO, their products are non-GMO. They fulfilled all the GMP, the HACCP, those standards. So they got a score of 50 on that. Next. In the enzymatic bioactive criteria, next, they got also a score of 20, all their products for the temperature. Again, it's a function of what temperature range that they're. Prabhakar, are they raw? I forget.
Yes.
Yeah, they're raw. Okay. They were enzymatically bioactive, and they got, all of their stuff is organic, high nutritional density. So this is one of the few companies who got 100 out of 100. Next. And those are their products. Next. So the summaries, they were certified in 2023. They met all the criteria at essentially a perfect score. Next. So what I want to do is talk about what does it cost for someone to do this. Now, remember, when we did this, this was really a project to help the industry. We weren't even thinking about business models like, I know the non-GMO guys have a serious major business model. This was more to really help the industry and to support people heading in the right direction. So the pricing model that we developed, Mark, we can see your screen. I don't know if you want everyone to see your email. Okay, there you go. So we want to walk you through this. If you can zoom in a little bit. So we have a little calculator. We're very, the calculator is actually up online too. So what we do is we typically look at the number of manufacturing sites the product's produced in, because that means different places we may have to do audits, right? We do, we have the right to do quality audits. The number of products is a second line. The third is a number of unique ingredients, the size of the company, in volume of sales, and that calculates an investment. So, Prabhakar, I don't want to reveal the numbers of this company. So let's say there's a company which has one manufacturing site where they produce. The number of products, in this case, it looks like they have about 7 products. We're not going to use, we're just saying, so 7 would be that number. So think about now we could charge by product and by total number of ingredients across products, and we could charge more. But again, we didn't want to sort of make this and, screw people. So what we did was we recognized that if you have a product, let's say you have a product which has honey as a base and cashew, and that's, let's say, product 1, honey cashew, and another one was honey and maybe sunflower seeds, another one was honey and, let's say, almonds, and so so it's 3 products. So the number there would be 3, or in this case, let's say where there were 7, but in this case with the 3, how many unique ingredients are there? Where there's not 6 ingredients, there's really 4. The honey is a base and these 3 products, right? So here we're saying the unique ingredients is not double counted. We could easily have said every product is different and we have to double count it, but that would increase costs, and we didn't want to do that because once we do the analysis, we can reuse it. And let's say the size of the company is $1 million. They would pay across all of those 2 certifications $990. Prabhakar, change the size of the company to be like 10. If it was a $10 million company, they'd pay a lot more. And if you divide 2001.70 by 7, you get $285 for both certifications. Clearly, if they're raw, it's going to get the clean. It depends on people want to use it in their branding. If people just want to use one of the certifications, it's a 20% discount. And in that case, they pay $228 per certification. So 7 products, $228 per certification. Below is a curve that we came actually in collaboration with people in the industry. As your volume of business on the bottom right increases in millions, then you have a factor which is used. So basically the larger companies pay more than the smaller companies. Okay, let me just end here and then we'll go to Q&A. We can come back, but the purpose of today's call was to let you know we have created the certification. We have new areas that people want us to apply. We take feedback. People want us to apply this now to eggs. What are the other areas, Prabhakar?
Fresh produce.
Into produce. People want us to apply it to soil, believe it or not. So as people come with new ideas, we have to then, within this rubric of these 5 aspects, figure out how the rubric fits in, and then develop that standard, with typically stakeholders in the industry. We bring together a committee, they give their ideas, and we bring it back to the public, let people review it, give their feedback. So it's pretty much a bottoms up. That's why we say it's bottoms up. It's not some person at the USDA meeting with lobbyists saying, this is what we want. This is truly bottoms up. It's consensus based. So let me stop here and take any questions, but we can go more into any of this. But we want to make sure we have time for people's questions and feedback, etc. If you want to ask a question on the bottom of this, if you're on your desktop, you can move your cursor along the bottom, and there's a thing called reactions. If you click on reactions, there's a thing to raise hand, and you can do that. We also, as people are thinking about that, we also want to let you know that anyone here, Dr. Prabhakar will put up a Calendly link. If we want to have a more longer conversation, I've carved out time in my office hours for 15 to 20 minutes. To go into something deeper, we can do that. Dr. Prabhakar will share the Calendly link, and you can just set up time. So for example, if you have a area that you want to participate in, we've set up a model with the nonprofit that people can actually be trained in this certification to help other organizations bring them in. So there's various opportunities for individual people's involvement in this. It is evolving. It's continually changing. Prabhakar, what was one of the recent things that we just added in the certification, like within the last year?
I think animal-based products.
Yeah, so we've had some feedback where people want us to look at animal-based products. But we'll have to go through a process to do that. So if we're looking at, let's say, an animal-based product, we'll take the systems approach. We won't just look at, is it organic or not? And we haven't developed this yet. It'll be based on public feedback. Perhaps the quality of the soil, the quality of the feed, how the animal is fed. Many of these multi-systems approaches will take. Any questions? Okay. What I wanted to do is just give you a little bit, just as a quick aside on Prabhakar, you may want to bring up if you can go to the osteoarthritis, the UHN work. I want to just give you guys sort of this will give you guys, it may inspire you, but the core technology that one of the areas that I've been working on, I've been very interested, I love physical chemistry. And in 2003, some of you may know, when the Genome Project ended, the realization in the Genome Project was that, Prabhakar will come back to this, just hold on one second, we'll bring this up, was that we have the same number of genes as a worm. Prior to that, in 1993, people went into the Genome Project thinking that what made us different than a human was we must have more genes. So it's a very reductionist model. When the Genome Project ends, we have about 25,000 genes. In fact, plants have more genes. So this threw a real wrench into the reductionist biologists, and they had to rethink everything. And what the conclusion was, two organisms may have the same number of genes, but how those genes express themselves and how the gene products interact could create very complex, what are called molecular pathways in one realm, and not so complex molecular pathways in another organism. So a worm, a nematode, has about 25,000 or 20,000 genes. We have the same. But obviously we do all of this. And that comes because we have much more complex molecular machinery from that perspective. That complex molecular machinery is exhibited in what is known as molecular pathways, the choreography of many different molecular reactions. So what happened after 2003 was the entire field of biology was turned topsy-turvy, and it went into a field called systems biology. MIT that year opened up an entirely new department, which they do probably one every 100 years, called biological engineering, which was formerly known as the Department of Food and Nutrition Science that Barry Sears came out of. And they realized we needed to build a whole engineering discipline to support advances in biology. So I went back to MIT, believe it or not, at the age of 44. I had left in the middle of my PhD thesis in 1993 to go start a different company in analytics. Came back because medicine was really my love, but I hated reductionist medicine. And my PhD thesis was, could you create a technology to mathematically model the whole human cell? It's called a grand challenge. And I ended up building an infrastructure to do that, which enabled us to find molecular pathways, like sodium plus chloride equals sodium chloride. There are these discoveries that are all out there in the literature. They've done the studies. It's sort of a piece of scientific truth. Could you take all those truths, connect them together? I mean, this is pretty crazy when you think about it, within the right compartments, organize it. So this was seen as what's called a intractable problem. The approach I took was more of a distributed engineering systems approach, because if you study biology, one researcher may spend their entire life just trying to understand how two proteins interact, and they could win a Nobel Prize for that. Biology has to be reductionist. So I ended up building what was known as CytoSolve, a way that we could decentrally let people do their own things, and CytoSolve would couple systems of molecular pathways. It took me, 4 or 5 years to finish my PhD, get it accepted. MIT doesn't let you get out of there unless you do something unique and it's validated. And so those of you want, I could do a longer talk on this, but CytoSolve evolved around that. But my real love was natural chemistry, because I'd grown up in India, many of you know, and my grandmother was a traditional healer. India has a huge history of combination therapies. The problem is the Indian Vaidyas, as they call them, can't explain it. So people think it's just garbage and they put it down. But for me, it was coming back full circle, because I saw my grandmother, who was a healer in that village, combine these combinations and help people. But with CytoSolve, we could validate this now, or get closer to validating it, because pharmaceutical companies can only, at best, do single compounds. And that takes them 13 years, $5 billion. So CytoSolve evolved out of that. And that was in 2007, 8, when I graduated. We wrote some very important papers, and we had to very quietly publish these papers in the big journals to get credibility. So we published in Nature and in IEEE and Cell. And once we did that, we started saying, let's start using this engine at a bigger level. And for fun, quote unquote fun, what we did was we took on pancreatic cancer. We modeled all the molecular pathways. We went through every compound. There's about 257 drugs pharma uses for cancer therapy. And I don't really care about pharma, but I wanted to show that I could participate at their same level. Right now, it takes, like I said, 13 years to get a drug through the FDA, and most of those drugs have serious side effects. And it takes 2 years to get what's called allowance to do clinical trials. So we went through all the 256 cancer drugs. We had the molecular pathways of pancreatic cancer, where we're trying to induce apoptosis, which is cell death, or decrease cell proliferation. And we did 2 drug combinations. And we found about 70 that were viable, 7 we optimized, and 1 we actually submitted to the FDA. And we were only a 5-person company, so we had to fill out 10,000 pages of paperwork. We wanted to see how the FDA would react to this. And when we submitted this, the FDA actually contacted us. A senior official at that time reported to Janet Woodcock. They said, we've never seen anything like this. This is the future of 23rd century medicine. And they gave us our allowance. We got it in 11 months. Then we went to MD Anderson, and we didn't really want to build the drug. We just wanted to show that we could do it faster and cheaper. But my real interest was in natural product chemistry. So now we've taken our engine, and we have, Prabhakar, maybe you can bring up that one slide. We have a process. First we take all the literature, we curate it, make sure as best we can the validity of that literature, and we develop what we call an architecture of that disease. I know, Udo, you've written in your book on the arachidonic acid pathway, for example, right? And how some of these, the ratio of omega-3s to 6s. To me, with our technology, we could actually validate it and figure out the right combos, for example. I can unmute Udo if you want. So because because a lot of the stuff people have asserted, Udo and others listening, we have the capability to actually validate it at the physical chemistry level and then publish on it to really support great products. There's a lot of great products out there, but because of the combination nature of natural products, sometimes they don't get the validation that they need. So what we've done now, Prabhakar, if you can bring up that slide. So what we do is we literally take a field now. We've done this in 35 fields, from gut brain health, from osteoarthritis. It's quite a Herculean effort. Yeah, Prabhakar, maybe you can go to, yeah, so these are all the fields we're working in. And what we do is, first we develop a systems architecture, then we publish, then we do the modeling, then we do the screening, and then we discover, and then we didn't know we were going to do this, but we started doing licensing. There are companies who already have products. So Prabhakar, show them, let's go to the next slide. So for example, let's go to osteoarthritis. So in osteoarthritis, for example, by the way, we go get the best people in a field to validate our work independently. So first we build the systems architecture next of a particular field, like osteoarthritis. Let's go to that site. So what we did was we went to I was giving a speech at the Arthritis Foundation, and the Arthritis Foundation, I talked about, hey, we have this technology. 3 of the leading people in osteoarthritis got very intrigued, and the University Health Network of Canada funded us to map out all the molecular pathways of osteoarthritis. And then we gave it away. We published it, but we open sourced it. That's what we do because we want the scientific community to further validate our work. So Dr. Prabhakar goes into this. We did a open source tool where if you look at osteoarthritis in the knee, there's many. So this is from think about like a Google Maps. You have the knee, and obviously you're trying to avoid pain in the knee. And then you have these various tissues, the meniscus, the fat pad, the osteophytes, the immune cells, the cartilage, the synovial tissue, and the subchondral bone. Now, if you go, for example, into the synovial tissue, you'll notice that there's different cells, SC cells, fibroblast cells, FFLS. These are different cells that make up that tissue. If you go to chondrocytes, cartilage is made up of one cell, chondrocytes. Now, within the chondrocytes have places where things can bind to them. You see, these cells have like gloves, receptors where things can land. So we mapped out, again, I think we must have gone to about 150,000 pieces of literature, every different type of ligand, and we grouped them: growth factors, cytokines, other molecules, and co-culture, what people have seen in co-culture experiments. Next. So if you look at the cytokines, these are all the different kinds of cytokines. So IL-1 beta, TNF alpha, these are inflammatory cytokines. So if you click on any one of those, IL-1 beta, you can go deeper and you can see all the green molecules. So IL-1 beta, through a series of chemical reactions, will create the green ones and will suppress the red ones. Green meaning it is a molecule, green meaning it creates it, red meaning it inhibits it. So if you look at one of them, let's say MMPP13, those of you know a little bit about some of the biological chemistry, MMPP13 is not a good molecule. It leads to degeneration, catabolic effect, okay? Then if you go here, we've mapped out the particular ways in how IL-1 beta, that's a cell surface, affects MMPP13. Okay, and then we've mapped out all the different natural interventions that can inhibit that. So for example, if you look at geneticide, we can take you right to that particular paper, okay? So this has been a Herculean effort. This is what we call a systems architecture, okay? And we've mapped all this out, etc. Prabhakar, just by way of example, just go to the AML paper, Prabhakar, on another screen. So in AML, which is leukemia, we just finished doing this on all the different mechanisms of action. So you see, we take a systems approach. We're not just looking at a drug company just hitting one target to create a particular reaction to create a drug. We want to create a holistic map of what's going on so future people can really create products that actually work, right? But we give this away to the public. Most people would keep this kind of intellectual property very secretive. So can you bring that up, Rebecca? Yeah. So if you look at this similarly, and we've now done this for 35 different diseases with us funding it ourselves, no public funding, no NIH grants, because what we're doing is new. By the time you get people to fund it, you have to do massive song and dance. It's a whole racket. So we decided just to do it ourselves, and we can get it done faster. So this was done in about 3 years, and we went to one of the leading women in the field, Catherine Sakamoto, and she reviewed our work and gave her approval that, and she's one of the leading people in amyloid leukemia research. Next, and if you go down through this, we've done something very similar. So we have mapped out, Prabhakar, just go down to the wiring diagram. So the extraordinary thing is we have this complete molecular mechanism of leukemia of all the cells. This can now be converted to physical chemistry equations because every equation is mapped. We're not saying it's perfect, but it's far better than just throwing stuff against a wall. And then we can start, go back to the slide set, Prabhakar. Just want to give you an idea. This is what an architecture is. So using these architectures, then we publish it, right? We publish this. And then we can use it to actually do the physical chemistry modeling because CytoSolve allows us to combine all of these pathways in scale. Without it, we couldn't do it. It becomes intractable. Next. So that's really sort of the secret sauce with CytoSolve. So here what we did was we actually went to combination screening. We did trillions of computations, and we found these two compounds, both of them come from chamomile one and the other one from bitter tea. You see, we're looking at multiple pathways. When people says, oh, I take this thing, it helps my joints. Well, which pathway? And there could be many more, by the way. So we're able to actually understand the mechanisms, quantify it, and then find the right ratios. Next. In this case, we actually applied for a patent. We went through the whole process. It's very hard to get to prove to the patent office you have a non-obvious combination. And then we said, why don't we make it? Okay, next. So I wanted to share this with you, Prabhakar. Go back to the slide set with all the different areas. So we are actively, without any funding from any governmental agency, we've gone after all of these. No, go back to the other one, Prabhakar, the full one. We've gone after all of these. And you can see what stages they're at. So we want to share this with you because when we look at clean food, the ingredients that go into it, we have the opportunity to look at, there's 10 to the power of 36 different compounds in nature. And in my view, those compounds in the right combinations hold, the secrets to a lot of ailments. The traditional medicines people did that, but they couldn't explain it. CytoSolve allows us to explain it. And that's why we integrated that into this clean food piece. We donated it so we can really help look at other areas. So thanks, Prabhakar. So I want to let you guys know that this is AI only can look at what's out there that exists. This is actually looking at the mechanisms. Chemists, physical chemists appreciate this a lot. So I wanted to let you guys know that. Anyway, any questions? Any questions? Comments? Okay. Oh, Omar has a question. Omar, go ahead.
What's going on? How are you doing, Dr. Shiva?
Good, Omar. Go ahead. What's your question?
No, I just wanted to have a comment. Not necessarily a question, but I appreciate you going into details with that. This is the first time I've seen that. Those details. I know there's a lot more details to it, but that really opens my eyes and my mind to the whole concept of compound with compound and the interactions with those, because when I went to college, that's basically what it was in biology, right? They didn't get into those type of details. And I always wondered if there was going to be a way that we could do what you're doing now. And, and then I, we've had conversations before where I stepped away from the field of nutrition and, dietary studies and stuff and got into become a journeyman lineman. But when I got back into it, years later, and I stumbled onto you through a friend of mine, during the COVID stuff. And you started, I started seeing the cytosol stuff. I was like, wow, this guy hit it. He's cracked the code on this stuff. And so that drove me to where I'm at now,
Yeah. So yeah, look, the reality is this is not easy stuff. It's a lot of complexity. And people typically think you can hand wave complexity. Pharma went the route because they couldn't handle the complexity to do single compounds. So they'll hit a target, it'll cause reactions, other reactions. The health people over here, the traditional medicines people, they know to use combinations, but this world is over here and the world of magic bullet, single molecule medicines over here. And the problem is this world has not been able to explain why this stuff works to these people. So there's this big division. My whole intention of developing Cytosolve was to help bridge this gap. And I think so we help organizations validate that their stuff works so they can essentially communicate that to people. There's some companies putting out products, believe it or not, even in this world, that they do a lot of marketing, but they actually are afraid to really do the science because maybe their stuff doesn't work. Many, many years ago, there was a Chinese medicine company, multi-billion-dollar company in California. I'm not going to say who it was. The father had been selling these products in this multi-level marketing stuff, making lots of money. The son went to medical school. When he heard about Cytosol, he goes, wow, let's use this to validate my dad's products. Anyway, we had come to an agreement, but at the last minute, they backed out. He said, my father's afraid that you may find out our products don't work. And what will that do to our brand? So I'm just telling you that both these worlds, Cytosol in many ways can bring honesty to both these worlds. So I've seen amazing products in this world that they write about in a certain way, the best science that they can do. But with Cytosol, we can help actually go down to the molecular level and do research with them. That's why when I was referring to what Udo's oil, I mean, Udo did some of the first research talking about the arachidonic acid pathways, right? Right now, everyone says seed oils are bad. Well, that's actually not true. It depends on how those seed oils are processed. So Booby effing Kennedy, as I call him, is just a hype artist. He jumps on different fads and he's saying all oils are bad. That's nonsense because traditional cultures have been using oils for thousands and thousands of years. It's how the oil is produced. Is it rancid? Are the bonds broken? So none of that's talked about. So we still go into this pro or anti nonsense. And that's going to actually hurt people because everyone's going to stop using certain oils, which can actually be quite beneficial for people. They're medicines if used the right way. I don't know, Udo, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that's exactly the point of it. The reason why I got into the field is when I got poisoned and I was trying to figure out how to get healthy, I started looking at oils, and I got a study that said omega-6 is an essential nutrient, so you have to have it to be healthy. And the very next study said omega-6 gives you cancer and kills you. And I'm going, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
Right? I have to take it so it can kill me. And so then I started looking at the processing, and I realized that what people are blaming on seed oils and omega-6s should be blamed on the damage done by the processing and in the frying pan.
Exactly.
And they're not making that distinction because they haven't done all their homework.
Yeah, and that's and this is a fundamental. By the way, Udo, I sent you my email if we want to do a follow-up at some point. It'd be good.
Yeah, I would. That would be very. I'd be very interested in doing.
Yeah,
that.
I sent you a quick email on the chat right here. If you see.
Okay, I don't have the chat open. Hang on. I'm a tech ditz. So.
Okay, but if you look at there's a little chat on the bottom that has a little balloon. It says participate.
Oh yeah. Got it.
So just give me your email. But yeah, so I think this is the whole point, like you said, Udo.
Yeah.
My dad was a chemical engineer, and it was always about processing. Like we said, in India, there's a very interesting food made. You could argue that it's absolutely clean. They take rice, grain, they soak it with a little bit of a small bean, and they soak it for 2-3 days. It lets it ferment, and they throw away the water. They grind it, so it's fermented. And then they steam it. It's one of the most healthiest foods. Now, the typical keto people say, oh, this is bad food. It's grain and beans. It's not true. So the processing now, people, those of us who understand a little bit of science and chemistry and processing know this is all chemistry. What happens to those double chain bonds, how they're treated, right? Those kind of things.
Yeah, and it just happens to be that the essential fatty acids, omega-6, but 5 times more omega-3, are the most sensitive of all of our nutritional molecules to damage by light, by oxygen, and by heat.
Right.
And so they should get the most care, and we give them the least care.
Yeah.
And so more health problems come from damaged oils than any other part of nutrition, and more health benefits come from getting the oils right than any other part of nutrition. That's kind of like how I picture what I wandered into in developing flax oil and then Udo's oil, right?
Yeah, I think fundamentally what's happened is the processing piece is left completely out, right?
Yeah.
Even if you're going to eat meat, how is it processed? Is it processed, right? The heat that we know that they're cancer-causing chemicals in heat. So everyone's promoting be a carnivore.
Yeah.
Well, no one talks about when they're grilling it, all the black stuff, charred material, and people are eating that, and they think there's not going to be a problem there. So I think this is that's why I love chemistry. Chemistry is really the bridge between, in many ways, the natural sciences and reality.
Yeah, biochemistry.
Yeah, biochemistry is very, very profound science. It's like sort of the bridge. It's even.
And I think it would be fair to say that for most of the problems that come from nutrition or from lifestyle, processing is the damaging factor.
Right.
And it's done in 100 different ways on 100 different kinds of foods.
Exactly.
And so if you look at that, so then you say, okay, well, you have to get back in line with nature and your nature. And if you live aligned with those, then you're probably going to do relatively well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just like the background of how I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, even if you look at eggs, a fried egg versus a poached egg versus a raw egg, these have very, very different properties based on the denaturing that's done.
Yep.
So that's why 90% of the videos on YouTube saying the amount of confusion people have, I think in the middle of all these billions of videos, more and more people are getting unhealthy in spite of all this information, because the information doesn't give people the framework on how to think on what we're talking about right now. Yeah.
Dr. Shiva, this is Omar. I have a question in listening to your conversation there. Would we say process is the disturbance in the system?
Well, from an engineering system standpoint, when you process stuff, that's a conversion aspect. Transport, conversion, storage. Udo, one of the things I teach people is system science from thermodynamic principles, the movement of information, matter, and energy. In the Indian system, they called it Vata. The conversion process is like digestion, like cognition, right? That's why gut and brain are related. They're conversion processes. But yeah, the processing, it's really the conversion process. If you take an oil, how it's ground, like in India, when my grandmother made an oil, she did it in a dark room. You squeezed it, you used it pretty much that same day.
Yeah.
You didn't, and if it was stored in a dark environment. You would add something to preserve it, right? Even, the oils, you should frankly put it in a freezer, right? Or add some vitamin
Well,
E.
I think I heard that they dug holes in the ground.
Yeah.
Kept the oil in holes in the ground because it was cooler down there than it was in the climate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Indians, by and large, have a pretty good diet, but Indians aren't that healthy because of the rancid oils now.
Mm-hmm.
So most Indians have liver issues because of the buildup of their carburetor with all these rancid oils. So the rancidity of the oil is what's really disturbing people,
Right. Can I say something to Omar?
Yeah.
I don't know if I thought you were talking about if processing is the problem. The issue with processing is it depends on what your goal is, because the goal defines the journey. So if your process is if your goal is to have a long shelf life on an oil, then what they're doing to the oils serves that goal very well. But if the goal is health, then the processing would need to be different, because it would need to take into account what are the needs of the body and how do you preserve the natural properties of what you're making so that it serves the biological system. I don't know if
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what Omar was talking about, but it
Yeah, I
sounded
think
to me
yes,
like that was in his question.
yes,
Yeah.
that answered my question.
Good.
And then also, Dr. Shiva explaining that that's conversion. And
Yeah, Prabhakar, can you bring up the InderScience paper? So, Prabhakar, bring this up. So, in all systems, we have an input and an output, and you have these three processes called transport, conversion, storage. I'll just give you a little bit of background where that question came from, Udo. Prabhakar,
Okay.
you can bring up the InderScience paper. So, many years ago, my background is in control systems engineering science, but also in these traditional systems of medicine. After I finished my PhD, Udo, I went back to India, and I was very curious now, even though I'd studied these traditional systems, what they really were. Because, they have a whole language, hot and
Yeah.
cold, and vata, pitta, kapha,
Yeah.
all these words. The
Yeah.
problem is,
I say Indian medicine, Ayurvedic medicine has processes that work and explanations that don't.
exactly. So I wanted to bridge
Yeah.
that. So the
Yeah.
problem is they have these processes at work. Prabhakar, if you can bring up that InderScience article. Are you there, Prabhakar?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
opening.
So the problem is that the explanations don't work because over thousands of years, when colonialism took foot in India, what ended up happening was many of the traditional medical centers were shut down during those 400 years. People continued to have these Siddha and Ayurvedic schools. Many Indians were told not to go to these schools. It was seen as a lesser um, a lesser profession. So people just learned this by rote. So they learned these processes by rote. So um, I wrote this in 2014, 4 years after I figured this out. It took a while to even get this published, but I wrote it in an engineering journal. So scroll down, Prabhakar. So in engineering systems science, and this paper is a cool paper. It looks at the origin of Western medicine. It came from war. It talks about systems biology, but in fact, go to the next one, Prabhakar. So if you take a thermodynamic course, you'll learn right there. No, keep on that one, Prabhakar. Every system has, if you zoom in a little bit, has input and an output. And there are three forces that typically people don't represent like this. Even though it's a simple diagram, it's a really cool diagram. You have the forces of transport, movement, the forces of conversion or the phenomenon of conversion, and storage and structure. So if you're making something, right, you're crushing some seeds to make oil, you're putting in the input as the seeds, then you're mashing it, which is a movement of your mallet, right? It's being converted from this solid to a liquid, and it's being stored in whatever the mortar the mortar that you're using, right? That's a structure. So this is input, output, transport, conversion, storage. Very basic stuff. Scroll down. When you take a much more advanced control systems course, if you look in the middle, you have still the input, transport, conversion, but in a dumb system, go up, Prabhakar, whatever system you want to talk about, it gets an input, puts out an output. Advertisers want to send you an input, you consume that information, it affects your cognition, and you go buy something, go down. But in an intelligent system, we have this concept of a goal. So and then you have someone who's making up a decision to then make these particular choices and to get an output. You're observing, is that output matching your goal? And there may be disturbances, right? You're trying to lose weight. You have a goal of getting down 120 pounds. You have disturbances, friends and family who don't eat well, the weight scale, and so on. I mean, you can apply this to anything. In the case of this discussion about oil, what is the goal? Is the goal to maximize profit? Well, in that model, then you take a very different approach to the kind of oil that you want to produce in this process, right? You're heating the hell out of it. You're adding all sorts of stuff, right?
Yep.
But if the goal is health, you'll do a very different conversion type process in here. Okay.
Yep.
Scroll down. So what I uncovered so that's Western engineering science. What I uncovered was when I started looking at my own studies of Ayurveda and Siddha, and by the way, this paper describes it right there. There are two words in the Indian system. They call it karma. Karma has nothing to do with past life. It's right action. Fall is the fruit of action, karma fall. So you still have Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, but Vata is the aspects of motion. Pitta is a conversion principle like digestion, cognition, and Kapha is a storage principle. Go down. And then when I layered on yogic science to it, Sankalpa was your mission in life. Manas were your mind. The Indriyas were the sensors. Vikaras were the disturbance. Go down. So to the point of explaining Ayurveda, this is what it is. Ayurveda and Siddha is actually much older, is actually an engineering system science, that they use different words. So this paper gives a bridge. And when I came back after my work, I taught it as a lecture series course at MIT. Then we created a whole program. Prabhakar, you may want to put every other Fridays, I do a program on systems health. And thanks, Prabhakar. We're now retraining MDs, healthcare practitioners, including Ayurvedic people who don't know how to explain this, the woo-woo people. The problem is people like Deepak Chopra, Deepak would offer my course, but he couldn't understand it. And him and the gurus with the robes, they took it into some other direction, talking about karma, this, that. But this democratizes this knowledge and makes it very explainable. It's basically these rishis were looking at the body as a system. They saw these processes of transport, conversion, storage. They saw this phenomenon of achieving a goal. And then you added these intelligent systems. So it's a wonderful way that I teach, but it bridges these two worlds. So the Indian system of medicine was, in my view, not a medical system. It was an engineering system to see systems of knowledge.
Wow. Well, that would be like a biological engineering system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the reality was, when you look at it that way, you understand every food has these properties of increasing motion, supporting conversion processes. And conversion processes are broad, not just digestion, but cognition is an information conversion process. This is why gut and brain health makes so sense, because it's a conversion process. You don't have to look at it as a brain and the liver or the gut. You say, oh, that's a conversion process, or and then the organs hang off of that. But in Western medicine, we focus everything on the organ. We sort of have flipped the whole diagram. We're focusing on the reductionist elements and not seeing the common processes that these things support.
Very interesting. The only thing I know a little bit about Ayurveda. I just found when I started working with omega-3s, it didn't fit into the Ayurvedic lore on oils, because they mostly used in India. They had omega-3s in chia in one of the seeds. They had it, but they didn't have a lore for it. Like sesame oils only got omega-6s in it.
Yeah.
Omega-3s. So when I said omega-3s do the opposite of omega-6s in many ways, not in all ways, but in many ways, they didn't know where to put that into their Ayurvedic understanding. No, their understanding might have not been the same as yours, but I found it very interesting.
The interesting thing is, Udo, what we're doing now is mapping. So Cytosolve is a tool that gives us this systems biology framework at the molecular level.
Yeah.
And over here, we have systems health with what I just shared with you. This gives us a much more engineering systems approach.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to take omega-3s and 6s and within this language, figure out where it fits in. Because ultimately, even if you look at the cell wall is where transport takes place. The cytoplasm is where conversion is taking place. And DNA is basically storage, right? It's a structure, right? So it's really, by the way, within any element, you have all three. Again, it keeps going, right? But within the kapha element is primarily DNA. But most of the conversion processes like translation, right, or transcription is occurring in the cytoplasm. But I think it'd be cool to do a follow-up. We can talk about that.
Yeah.
But,
so did you get my email?
Oh, hold on. Did you put it right here?
I put it in the chat.
Oh, wonder who you sent it to. Did you send it back to me?
I sent it to Clean and Raw Food Certification.
Oh, so Prabhakar, you must have it. Prabhakar, did you get Udo's email?
Yes, I did.
Okay, great. Yeah, Udo, I'll be in touch with you. Keep an eye out.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's, Yeah, so I think that one of the important things to understand is I think there's a framework to understand this, but I think, by the way, in the ancient systems of India right now, there's a caste system in India called the Brahmins and the non-Brahmins. The reality is Brahmins actually ate meat. Yeah.
Hmm.
Even if you read the Ramayana and all this, like Rama's eating meat. Okay.
Hmm.
So something happened, and people along the coast eat fish, right? So I think there was some dysfunction that took place. Siddha was the ancient form of Indian medicine. When the Aryan invasion took place in India, when I was with the Indian government, there's some very interesting data I saw. Ayurveda was a subset of Siddha. So there's a whole piece of Ayurveda that's missing a whole bunch of other knowledge because of the events that took place in India, historical, political, societal events.
Yeah.
So the Ayurveda that we have today is a subset of the actual pantheon of Siddha which took place. So, and the Siddhas were all into processing. They used to do these bhasmas. They used to take a plant and do it through very particular processing steps to do extracts, and very meticulous processing steps that they enumerated. So a lot of this processing stuff has been lost, and it's basically reduced to this is good, that is bad. Go ahead, Jeremiah.
One sec. Hi, Dr. Shiva. I had a question about on the Clean Food website, if there's like a listing of all the different, food companies. I've looked around on there before and I didn't find something like.
We didn't do that, Jeremiah, because we didn't want to support or be in the promotional world, right? So
Sure.
But if we do decide to do it, we'll figure out the right way to do it so it doesn't look like we're promoting a company, like advertising for them, right?
Yeah.
But we'll figure out how to do we'll figure out how to do that. Okay?
Sure.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yep. Matthew Stoneman from Tennessee. Go ahead, Matthew.
I actually had that was one of my questions actually that he just asked. The next one was, is there a way that, because all this framework, and I'm looking at it from an investor standpoint or from a brand new business startup, is creating the framework of a business plan that's grounded in all of these things that we could help bring, that new company can bring to investors. And what they're looking for is how well does this fit into making money in the future, with the clean food movement being in such high demand and it's exploding in growth, that maybe we could come up with, maybe it would be on Clean Raw Certified, create a business plan based on all these foundations, instead of trying to get these huge corporations that have been doing this practice in a certain way for such a long time. They're way more reluctant to incorporate all this, where they have to be super organized, they have to be super clean. But getting people that are new entrepreneurs that are understanding this from the ground level to all have that business plan structured from the get-go, then they create their business plan and then they bring it to an investor who sees all of this stuff, that they're being very particular about how clean they are, they're being very, very particular about how healthy and nutritious the food is. It makes it a no-brainer for an investor to give whatever it takes to build that facility out. Maybe it's $2 million worth of investments, but they can see how they can actually return to the company, and the investors can get paid back with all this framework. So I'm just thinking of bringing it to the new people emerging into a market and having an entire business plan framework where all this stuff is included, and then they just plug and play their different ingredients and their goal of what the product they're wanting to make. But then they're started from the ground up in that way. But we could help. I actually came up with this idea during this call, but there's a organization that's helping farmers and new farmers integrate together. They're having a problem with finding land, and this person's having a problem having new farmers take over their property. So it's two different people, but this nonprofit's come up with a document that helps the legal paperwork process. So that was my thoughts. Just see what you thought about that.
Yeah, well, look, I think there are four disruptive events taking place in the world right now. One is the advances in supply chain, which is how you move a product from point A to point B. Amazon is sort of reflects that, right? You go on Amazon, you buy, and they're able to take something from this point to this point and get it to you in like half a day. So those advances are just going to keep continuing. supply chain. The other is this thing called what they call SDG. Some of it, some of it's a scam, I think. But anyway, nonetheless, it's happening. This Sustainable Development Goals, right? The greenering, all that kind of stuff. The third is AI, the advances in artificial intelligence. But one of the four big trends is what they call quality of life. People want to have a better quality of life. People are awakening to that. Like they're like, yeah. And if you read a lot about people, in fact, the book just came out, people are on their deathbed. They'll keep saying, well, the material stuff never mattered. What mattered was my health, my relationships, my friendship. These are like people are, got 2 weeks to die. And it's quite interesting listening to those conversations. So that quality of life is what we're talking about, Matt. So to many of the tools that I never thought about it that way, that I was very excited by, was addressing that. Like, how do you work with natural products? How do you guys know I've been very, very vociferous on the political side. I have very little taste for people who lie and cheat, but that also comes to quality of life. So I think to the extent, Matt, that we can take, at least with the clean food, create a framework for what I think Matt's saying is, there's a young entrepreneur, maybe he has some money, maybe he wants to raise money. We give him the framework on how he goes and actually builds that new product. You see? Because it's true. If you take an existing large company, and I've worked at these companies, if you try to tell them to do something new, they're already going in a direction. In 1993, while I was at MIT, I was doing contract programming work for a company just to make money. And that company was doing CD-ROMs. And the CD-ROMs, we would put data on it with a search engine. I actually wrote one of the first natural language search engines. And I told the CEO of the company, I said, Kurt, his name was Kurt Mueller. I said, Kurt, we should move this engine to this thing called the internet. This is 1993. He goes, that's not going to go anywhere. He goes, we're focused on the CD-ROM market. We're making whatever, 20 million. I said, Kurt, I really think this internet's going to take off. I think people are going to want to search instead of on a little CD-ROM. And it was one of the best engines. Well, anyway, his company tanked. And obviously everyone knows what happened. The internet took off. Yahoo eventually, many, many years later, ended up buying that search engine. But you see, when people are headed in a certain direction, you think you could easily do this. You're in the search business. Why aren't you doing internet search? Oh, no, we're in the CD-ROM business. And this is what happens, Matt. People think, oh, I'm in this world, but they don't want to expand because it takes a lot to get a business going, do its work the standard way. Another friend of mine, for example, sold his friend sold their company, New Chapter, to Procter & Gamble. Well, when it was a small company, they had many high standards. Everything had to be organic. When P&G came in, eventually he got so frustrated and he left because they really didn't care about organic. So half of their ingredients went out the door. So I think what happens when you're in these other worlds, they're already headed into a certain cultural framework. So in some ways, it's good to start with someone new and give them a framework. A third example I'll give you is another a friend of mine. He was a pilot, a Air Force pilot in the Korean War. And then he became, a hobby pilot. But he said the hardest people it was ever to train to become commercial pilots were Air Force pilots, because they were crazy. They would fly their planes in crazy ways. In a commercial setting, you have to be very stable. And he goes, it was better off getting new people and teaching them how to fly a commercial airplane than getting what you would think would be existing pilots who had very, very valuable training. So I think the same thing happens when you have a new person coming. We could offer those people frameworks, Matthew, and then those people could create these nouveau companies with this framework. So I think it's a good thing. We have a lot of that domain knowledge, Matt. Those SOPs. Yep.
And it just seems like just like the foundation of a home. If you've already built your foundation on a weak foundation that's cracked, and it's going to be hard to disassemble the entire home and rebuild the foundation just to build that house back up again. But someone that's just coming in, I just see it on every angle, for an investor standpoint, for their standpoint. They're staying organized. It is I've read through the document. It's a lot of stuff if someone's just, you know, throwing it together in their home and got rats running around to completely dismantle everything and rebuild it right back up and
Yeah.
get all those certifications that they need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So we can do that. Good point. Let's, we have a few more minutes left. Thanks, Matt. Let's go to Deborah Backus-King. Deborah, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Yep.
Just wanted to ask, does there exist a herb or a tea or a fruit that can produce the hormones of the thyroid gland?
An interesting question. I do know supportive things that support your thyroid, okay? For example, the seaweeds, okay?
Yeah.
I have not had a chance to do that. Prabhakar, do you? I think what you're saying is there a plant that mimics, like, what is the standard thyroid hormone? Starts with,
Thyroxine.
what is that?
Thyroxine.
Thyroxine. Yeah, but there's
Thyroid.
there's Synthroid, right? Isn't that
Yes.
the pharmaceutical that they give, right? Yeah. There are a number of pathways that are involved there, okay? And obviously, if you know the right level of iodine is present, your thyroid will produce the proper, fire off the proper pathways. But I don't know. Odo,
Excuse me, hold on. But what
Yeah.
happens if you do not have a thyroid gland anymore?
well, that's when people go to that's when you're saying people go to synthetics, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know, but I would have to research that. I have not done that, but it's a pretty interesting area of research.
Should be able to make it in a tissue culture, in a thyroid gland tissue culture.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why they're not doing it, but it's probably because it's more
Okay,
expensive
I
than
just
to.
wanted to ask. I just wanted to ask whether anything exists at all. That's all. If something exists, fine. If not, nothing.
No, we don't. But I
Okay.
think, Udo, you're saying something interesting. There are now what are called microfluidics, where you can put a tissue culture of potentially that person's or a tissue, and then you give the nutrients and it makes it. You're saying, and then you put that in. So it's a naturally produced thing that's coming from your own tissue. So if they are about to remove someone's thyroid, maybe they take some of their own thyroid tissue, culture it, and then use that to make their own thyroxine, right?
Yeah,
Which,
only if you didn't have a thyroid, then you could get the same thyroid hormone made by somebody else's tissue, provided you could do it cleanly, so that you wouldn't have tissue rejection issues.
yeah.
So
Yeah. Let's go. Thanks, Deborah. And then finish up with WM. WM, what is your question? WM, can you unmute? Okay. Maybe they can't unmute. Let's go to Evan Samuel. Evan, go ahead.
Yes, my question with MV25. So with that input, we know what happens at the molecular pathway level, right? With that input, what about with the input of force to the joint? Would that be able to be
with the input of what?
force,
Oh, actual force?
actual force? Would we be able to map that out?
So I think what you're saying, if you have let's say you have a knee and you hit it with a force, right?
Correct, that input.
How does the joint respond to that? So that would be what's called a process of mechanotransduction. You're putting a mechanical force, and that's going to result in a series of chemical reactions. We can do that. We've done that in a different area with mechanical forces, literally at the microscopic level, when blood flows at shear stress. We haven't done that, but it shouldn't be that difficult to do.
Okay, interesting, because strength is, I'm looking at more as a sports specific training type aspect of, because specific force is measured in velocity, or I'm sorry, strength is measured in velocity. So
Well, force
ju-
is, well, if you're looking at pressure, it's measured in what's called, um, uh, basically it's force per unit area, okay?
mhm,
And it
mhm.
depends on if it's a compression force or a shear force or a tensile. There's different kinds of forces, but nonetheless, yeah, you can measure it.
Correct. Yeah. So like, well, like in this in sports, you would have like a reactive strength, you would have like a speed strength, strength speed, you would have absolute strength. So those specific inputs of that force is different than obviously for reactive strength than it is for like we call like a 1 rep max strength. It's a different input to get a different output, right? So I was just curious on
Well, so those things, if you're talking about lifting weights, right?
right.
You know, if you, for example, do a negative, those kind of different kinds of lifts, right? How you hold.
Mhm,
Ultimately, what you're doing is how it's basically what's called a temporal function, how much stress you're putting over a period of time. Okay, it's like a dosaging. It's like,
right.
and then giving us, so you could, each of those types of inputs would have to be understood.
Mhm,
Prabhakar, if you can bring up the nitric oxide example, right? So ultimately, if you think about it this way, every type of input ultimately has to manifest, in this case, if you look at the physical biochemical level, into some type of biochemical activity. The
mhm,
body, believe it or not, has transducers to do this. Your fascia, for example, is a electrochemical. Some people call it a piezoelectric transducer. When if a rolfing person, you put pressure on parts of your body, that pressure, that physical pressure results in an electrical signal. Okay? So we now know that the body has a lot of electromechanical signaling capabilities. In the case of, if you look at arterial flow, believe it or not, on the surface of your arteries is a cell called the endothelial. On the surface of the endothelial, about 15 years ago, they discovered a very interesting organelle called the glycocalyx. So if you see over here, this is some original work that I did many years ago, which we published in actually Cell. But see, here's a surface of an artery. Can you see that, Evan?
yes.
And you see that the artery is, or the capillary is plated with little hexagonal units, like, you know, a tile, like you'd be in your bathroom. And if you looked at the surface of that tile, on the far right is a structure called the glycocalyx. Fascinating structure. So when literally blood flows, physical, so that's shear stress, right?
Mhm,
When physical motion takes place, the blood flows over that little Christmas tree that Dr. Prabhakar's pointing to, and it moves it. And in the presence of endothelial nitric oxide synthase, which is a chemical, that movement converts to a series of chemical reactions, which releases nitric oxide and citrulline, okay? Which is what causes vasodilation. But here's a wonderful example of a physical structure that's in your body that reacts to a mechanical force. Prabhakar, I'm sure on the surface of chondrocytes, right, in the knee, are similar mechanotransducers, Evan, that when you hit them with different forces, right, joints, they react and they remodel. So it turns out runners, if you run a certain, this is the clinical data they have, if you run a certain amount, guess what? Your cartilage actually gets stronger. If you don't run at all, it gets weaker, but if you run too much, you start ripping it away. You have catabolic effects. So I'm saying, so it's clear that it has to do with dosaging, how much over what period of time. So, and I think that's what you're asking. And a lot of things that bodybuilders do is they try to figure out what is the right exercise, how many reps, what's the optimal thing that you do to have the best development. So,
yes. Yeah.
yeah,
Yes. That was
it'd
part
be
of my.
cool to understand at the biomolecular level. People have done more muscle studies. You know, I studied for many years ago with a guy called Frank Zane, who beat Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was the only guy who beat Arnold, but Frank was actually a chemistry teacher. And Frank had come to the conclusion that he overtrained when he was young. he said, I should never have done 6 reps high, because I hurt my joints and all this. He ultimately came to the conclusion that it was about parsimonious training. So obviously in the field of bodybuilding, it's a lot of experiments people do. And people try this and they try that, and then they do heavy negatives, and then people have retinal damage because they're putting so much hypertension on their body, right? So maybe things like yoga, right? Where you're using your, anyway, I think it's an area of wonderful research that needs to be done. What is optimal exercise at the biochemical level? How much stress inoculation should you do at what levels?
Yeah, because I know that there's a lot, everyone when talks about training and so forth, it's always the red tissue. There's not a lot, well, there's more on the actual articulation of the actual joint itself, and then the connective tissue, the white tissue. That's what I'm more interested in. Like what's going on and how to improve that articulation. I know it's at the end ranges. You want to train the end range of your articulation to actually help expand. I'm just curious on what exactly at the chemical reaction or the molecular, like what's happening when you're actually creating.
I'm saying that if we have by the way, this work that we did, this was done when I was at MIT between myself and a group of people. But if you look at this phenomenon of nitric oxide being released, by the way, nitric oxide, I think Time Magazine had it as a molecule of the century, right? In bodybuilding, people take all these stuffs, arginine to release NO, right? Or citrulline. Right. But if you look at this, next slide, Prabhakar, there's a series of, so if you go look at NO production, in the literature, you'll find all these little ball and stick diagrams. This is how biochemistry is taught. And if you wanted to get a holistic view of nitric oxide, some people say, oh, it's calcium influx, or it's enos expression. With cytosol next, this is one of the first papers we published to show the power of cytosol. We took all of these different subsystems, completely done by different groups of people all over the world, integrated them together, and then we predicted how much nitric oxide would be released, which is the next slide here. And you can see over time, so that black line is our computational result. Now, the issue is it true, right? Or is it just garbage in, garbage out numbers? We had one of my colleagues who was then Andrew Koo was working at Harvard Medical School, and he literally did the wet lab experiment in the lab, sending blood flow. Next slide. And he actually, those are the in vitro results, which is quite extraordinary. So our data came out first, and this is not a curve fit. So it's only after we published this. But we took every individual molecular pathway, each of which had been proven separately, and we connected them together. Next, and this got published in, and again, same here, how much protein is upregulated in Cell's Biophysical Journal. Up until this paper, most people didn't believe you could do but this is engineering. You see, we're finding out the engineering equations, not just doing random modeling. So anyway, yeah, we could do that. I just want to let you guys know we have this tool. It's an opportunity for products and things that we know work to figure out why it works at the biomolecular level. Thank you, Prabhakar. All right, everyone. I know someone we're trying to do, but we can't get them WM. But I hope this was valuable. If any one of you has other things you want to consider, and let me just wrap up. How can you support our work? We always have to do this end sort of pitch to make sure you guys want to stay involved somehow. Udo, I just sent you an email, by the way. I gave you my cell number there. Prabhakar, can we finish up? So those of you who come here, number one, know that the framework, let's go here. Yeah. So one of the ways you can support our work is, by the way, everything that I do, Dr. Prabhakar does, no one gets paid for this. It's purely voluntary, and we've created this large-scale movement. So if you know people want to get clean and raw certified, contact us. Dr. Prabhakar's put a link there. You can become an affiliate. You can help refer people to food and supplement manufacturers. We actually are now starting to create products based on cytosol, which funds actually our larger educational movement. You can fund research. And the other thing is you can join the movement for Truth, Freedom, Health. It's a global movement. We have about 500,000 people. But our view is you have to connect politics, with science, with health. You can't just be in the world of health all day. Because if you remember during COVID, the so-called healthy people were the yoga Nazis, all were promoting wearing masks, getting the jab, and mask mandates. These were the healthy people. The gurus in India were forcing people to be vaccinated. Deepak Chopra at his retreats, you had to be vaccinated. So obviously there's a dysfunction. So the larger issue of health must be connected to the politics. So for me, this has been a life journey, having grown up in India in a caste system, that I was always interested in politics, always interested in medicine. And so we want to encourage all of you. One way you can support yourself is go to truthfreedomhealth.com, become part of this larger movement that intersects all these three worlds. In my view, the number one cause of health issues, obviously we can talk about eating proper foods, is stress. The number one cause, you can eat the best foods. Notice some people are really eating all the foods, but you hang out them, you get really stressed out. They're not nice people. So stress is the number one way that affects your health. And number two is community. Number one is community, friendships, relationships. Of all the centenarians that they studied, what they noticed was the communal relationships people had were the number one. It made people feel calm, trusted, secure. You can't underestimate the body's ability to process or not be able to process stress. So I want to emphasize to people that there's two really fights for health. One is the individual level, what you eat, what you consume, but there is a larger collective fight, because it turns out the communities where there's the highest levels of health issues, turns out it's the communities where they have the highest amount of income inequality. You can't forget that, right? And no one wants to talk about that. That if you have, in fact, if you compare the community in Fairfax, Virginia, to another community in Virginia, one community, people are living to 82, 83 years old, men, and another community, the men are living to 62 to 63, nearly a 20-year difference. 300 miles away in the United States. So one community has the health metrics of Sweden. The other community has the health metrics of Iraq in the United States. So we have to recognize that, in my view, that we have produced some pretty incredible infrastructure. There should really not be any want anymore. We produce more than enough food. There's more than enough resources. But what capitalist imperialism has done in an unfortunate ways, even though it can produce so many things, I mean, these iPhones are probably only about $2 to make. They're sold for $1,000. But people will not sell them for what they're worth, because they have to maximize profit. And maximization of profit, high prices, high cost of living, is dependent on making you think there's supply chain issues. So supply is actually controlled. And India produces so much rice. But the government actually controls it. And they put a lot of it into making alcohol, hard whiskey and stuff like this. So I would argue that you need to get politically attuned to understand that those in power, in my view, don't really have that much of an interest in a much more environment where everyone can live within their means. So they've created artificial shortages. That's why I encourage everyone to get involved in the movement for Truth, Freedom, Health. I spend 20 or more % of my time talking about the politics, but using the same framework of system science to understand it. So these are a number of ways you can get involved. I think Prabhakar, you can sort of scroll through this. So those of you who want to support this, you can go to the Center for Integrative Systems. If you want to save on taxes, you can donate $1, $2, whatever you want to donate to support the work you're doing. You can buy t-shirts. Next. You can also get your products clean food certified. You can go, Dr. Prabhakar's put this link if you want to follow up. Those of you, I know Matt Stoneman is interested in Tennessee. He's going to restaurants. He's talking to manufacturers. We are also thinking of enabling people to build their own sustainable businesses using this framework. Next. We have affiliate programs. Next. And you can learn more about them. It's hard to do that on this call. Next. We have products that we're developing. You guys can actually help build products. The infrastructure of Cytosolve can be used by you to make your own product, right? We went ahead and we built these products. Recently, what we've done, this is pretty cool. Udo, you'll like this. We went back and studied the ancient literature of India, the Siddha literature, and we identified combinations of ingredients that affect these, what you call these dysfunctions. And then we actually had them made in India, and then we are running them through Cytosolve to understand why they work, the mechanisms of action. So we recently, for example, you can look at the products this way next, or you can look at them as much more functional products. Oh, go back, Prabhakar. Those are the ways that, so these are, so for example, joints is typically a Vata issue, but some people don't want to learn the Ayurvedic stuff. Oh, give me the stuff for joints or immunity or tranquility. But all of these are formulated using these ancient processes. But what we're attempting to do, not only give people the end product, but also explain why they work, the scientific background. So each of these will have their scientific papers that go with them. So thanks, Prabhakar. So, support our products. It's a way that you're supporting all this work. Thank you. Emily says standard process makes a thyrotrophin PMG supplement from animal thyroid to help support natural thyroid function and also avoid autoimmune attack of the person's own thyroid if it has not yet been removed. Mike says a dural tissue that surrounds the brain and spinal cord is also piezoelectric gel that responds to vibratory stimuli. So is the pineal gland. That was done by Israeli researchers. Mary Burke said the answer to thyroid question is olive leaf extracts. I'm interested in having both my canine, kale, and herbal results certified. Also, I pray to have you and your founder herbal results industry and the founder herbal industry who's been reversing cancer major illnesses, including a 40 centimeter brain tumor on a video interview. Let me know. Much appreciated as your Cytosolve research along with Tufts University in creating natural nutrition. Yeah. So Mary, if you can look at the Calendly link Dr. Prabhakar put up and set up time, we'd love to do that and support what you're doing. So Prabhakar, if you can share that link again, and Mary, if you can do that, then we can do a follow-up. So to everyone listening, if you want to have a more detailed discussion, I've organized my schedule as best as I can to carve out 15 to 20 minutes with Dr. Prabhakar and I so we could follow up. And if we want to do any follow-up relationships, partnerships, etc. All right, everyone, I hope this was valuable. Prabhakar, is there anything else that I forgot to mention?
I think that's all.
Okay. Yeah. So everyone, go become a Truth from Health Warrior Scholar. We built a global movement. Many of you know I ran for president with only about $125,000 we raised. We got on the ballot in nearly every state. According to the Constitution, it says only a natural born citizen can run. I challenge that because the 14th Amendment says everyone is equal. And we actually got on the ballot. So I think I was the first guy in the United States as a naturalized citizen to get on the ballot. In New Jersey, not only did we get on the ballot, they threw us off the ballot. I took it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided not to even challenge me and remain quiet. So it's pretty cool. But anyway, out of that effort, we've built a national organization, a global organization, particularly in the Scandinavian countries, in Europe. We have people who've emerged bottoms up. Again, everyone in our movement is working people, but we're educating people to critically think. And I want to leave everyone with this important thing. What we are fundamentally doing is teaching people how to think. Systems thinking gives you the way how to think. So what we just walked you through clean food, it's not saying eat this or eat that, but it's saying, look, think about the safety of the food, think about the bioavailability, think about the nutritional density. Like there's not one thing that determines food. You saw the exchange between Udo and I talking about processing. So we want to create a much more critical thinking citizenry because the establishment is watching people wanting to get healthy, but they're going to create these reductionist solutions. Don't eat seed oils, eat beef lard, right? As an example. Booby Kennedy, as I can tell you, he was, by the way, Kennedy was promoting lockdowns. He was promoting the climate change scam in the middle of COVID. He has said he's vaccinated all his kids and he wants full vaccination of all Americans. So Trump around him has presented himself as a fighter, But if you really study him, he is what the establishment has created as a boondoggle to manipulate people, to talk all the right words, but they're not getting down to the heart of the issues in any issue. They're just going to make people get complacent, thinking Trump is going to take care of everything. I mean, the Democrats have imploded as a party. So there's really like no opposition anymore in the United, except our movement in many ways. So I want people to understand we're teaching people how to critically think, not what to think. So when you look at food, it's not about, oh, this food is going to do it. No, how is the food processed? What is your body type? What is the environment taking place? What is the weather? It's a much more complex systems issue. So goals, we want to think smart people. Who should you vote for? Well, it depends. It's not left or right. Look at the person's history, right? Do they do what they say? And if we can create critical thinking people, especially in the world of AI, let me tell you, AI is going to replace a lot of the dumb people because it'll be able to do all the stuff. But AI is going to create opportunities for smart people. Just like you will use these tools. I mean, they're functional tools. Don't think they're thinking tools. They're not really doing thinking. They can get a lot of data, organize it for you, and do that kind of stuff. So the people that are going to do well, or they're going to die, frankly, the elites want to actually, in my view, they don't want that many people, are the people who can critically think. So if we can generate people who know how to think in science, in activism, it's going to be a very different world. And that's what we want to support doing. So what we're doing at Truth, Freedom, Health is really to teach people how to think. And we live in a world of complex systems, food systems, healthcare systems, transportation systems. And you have to take a systems approach. Otherwise, you're going to get lost in this right versus wrong. And if you go to the website, I'll bring it up. There's 2 diagrams. And if you want to, I'll go to the site. But I've spent most of my life, inventing things and creating things. But Truth, Freedom, Health is a site that when you have a chance to go to, it says get educated or be enslaved, okay? And if you want to explain this to your friends, what we're doing, fundamentally, if you look at this picture here, there's so much information on health, on well-being out there, but lots of information is not meaning that we're getting smarter people. In fact, look at the data. In spite of all these videos, all these health videos, this is a reality. More and more people are getting obese. It's prospected in 3 years, half of the world is going to be obese. Okay? So information is not helping people because the reality is this information is being filtered through this ignorance. Again, I can't overemphasize what Udo and I just talked about, these seed oils, right? Seed oil is good, seed oil is bad. So people get into this pro and anti. And then people get confused. And most people, when they get confused because they're hardworking, they don't have the time, they'll either just not do anything or they'll get desperate. And this is why it's important. The way you break from this is to recognize the so-called people that are presented to you as fighting for you are in fact the people that the establishment has anointed to confuse you. And so it's really up to you, if you want to save yourself, to really understand how to think. And that's what I want to offer people. So that way you build your own wisdom and clarity, but how to think really comes from a systems approach. So fundamentally, my intention is people learn how to think, not what to think. Because if you don't learn how to think, AI is going to replace you. You're going to eat this or that and get totally confused. And you're going to think there's a magic bullet solution to everything. That's what pharma wants. Or you're going to choose one leader one day. I'm going to vote for Bernie Sanders one day. Then you're going to go to Obama and then to Trump and then back to Tulsi Gabbard. And you find out all these people are part of the establishment. They're not anti-war. Tulsi Gabbard, by the way, is pro-war. She wanted to bomb Iraq. She wanted to go into Palestine. And you start seeing that these people are all fictions. So we really need to create a world of critically thinking people. And I think we have enough of those people, and we have a number of those people on this call. It's going to be much more difficult to get fooled because we'll have enough critical mass. And you don't need 100 million critically thinking people. Even if you have about 10,000 to 1 million people can have a massive effect. All right, everyone, thank you. Be well. Thank you for all your attendance. Thank you for your great questions and comments. Dr. Prabhakar's put that link up there. And I look forward to hearing from some of you. Thank you.
Thank you,
well.
Dr.
Yep.
Enjoy the rest
So,
of the day.
WM, did you have a question? Quick question before we send?
Well, it's been a long while, so I'll catch you tonight at 7.
Oh, no, we don't. Do we do? No, Thursday night. We go 7.
Or Thursday. Okay, I'll catch you on
Okay.
Thursday.
Yeah, Prabhakar, put the orientation to everyone. Every Thursdays at 11 a.m. and 8 p.m. we do our orientation for our Truth for Health movement. We do it twice. It's a long day, but you get a chance to meet people from all over the world who are everyday people who want to learn how to build bottoms-up movements. I did a talk yesterday on Syria. You guys may want to look at that. It really gives the analysis of what's really going on in Syria beyond the Russian Assad, Iran on one side, or the United States, the Islamists and the Zionists and the Saudi Arabians on the other side. And what people don't understand is there was a bottoms-up movement coming up in Syria, and that was crushed by the Russians and the Iranians and the Assad to stop the Islamic fundamentalists. Well, Russia couldn't support them anymore, Assad, because they have Ukraine. So they went, and the United States and the Zionists have supported the Islamic fundamentalists. So the elites don't really care about people. By the way, in Syria, 90% of people are below the poverty level, earning $2 a day. It's quite extraordinary. 21 million people since 2011 from the civil war, half of them have been displaced. 10 million people. And so what you're going to see is you're going to see, in my view, Syria going to get shredded. Turkey's going to take the top part of Syria. Israel's going to take the bottom. It's going to be a free-for-all. It's going to be ravaged, that country, by imperialism. But it's important to understand that when you take a bottoms-up approach, you understand that none of these people are working for us. Globally, working people, hardworking people, we have to unite and get smart on how to think about the world. And we can't rely on these leaders anymore because they have their own interests. They don't serve, they serve other masters. All right, everyone, thank you. It was great to have you. Be well, be the light to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, Dr. Shiva.
Prabhakar, I'm going to leave this here so people, maybe you can sign off so people understand the Calendly link. And again, we recommend those people set up time. Be well. Thank you.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.